Hi, welcome to another episode of Wild Sarasota, this time for some turtle talk. My name is Zahir Ringgold Cordes, and I work for UF IFAS Extension Sarasota County as the Environmental Education and Outreach Program Assistant on the Ecology and Natural Resources team. Today, we'll be discussing tortoise and freshwater turtle species. We'll go through some extensive information about turtles, and then we'll talk about a few of the species that can be found in Sarasota County and what you can do to help and do your part when it comes to turtle conservation. The UF IFAS extension is the result of a partnership between Land Grant Research University, the University of Florida, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and Sarasota County government. There is an extension office in every county in Florida that partners with the local government in each of those counties, as well as throughout the nation. There are other extension programs in partnership with different land and sea grant research universities. Our job at Extension is to extend the research and resources from the university to our community through community initiatives, education, classes, outreach programs, and opportunities for our community to get involved. And we cover several areas of importance in order to meet the diverse needs of our community, including agriculture, community development, and sustainability, gardening and landscaping, natural resources and ecology, nutrition and healthy living, and youth development through our 4-H program. And we really strive to provide practical education and information to help our residents, professionals, decision makers, everyone in our community to be a part of a more sustainable and healthy future. A little bit more about the Ecology and Natural Resources program specifically. It is made up of 2 individuals, myself and Dr. Catherine Clement, who you may have seen in some other Wild Sarasota presentations, who is our Ecology and Natural Resources educator and program supervisor. What we do on the Ecology Natural Resources team is we really try to educate and empower residents, citizens, visitors, really everyone by promoting awareness of our diverse natural resources. I don't know about you all, but I feel so lucky to live here in this beautiful place where we have so many amazing wildlife and spectacular parks and preserves. And so we really want to foster connections and teach people how to be a part of conservation of these unique and vulnerable ecosystems that we live amongst. And so we do that by providing educational programs, outdoor recreation programs, and wellness opportunities for youth, families, adults, professionals, people who want to volunteer, and really the general public. We focus on wildlife education and concern. So if you ever have a wildlife related concern, you can always email us and send us pictures to ask questions. We share native and invasive species education. We educate the community about the health benefits of spending time in nature. We lead eco walks and meditation walks throughout county preserves and parks. And we really try to reach as much of our community as possible. So we hope to see you at a program sometime. And if you'd like to learn more about wildlife, we have a wildlife webpage that can be accessed through the QR code that is here on this slide. So let's talk a little bit about where the story of turtles begins. We're going to go back millions of years ago, approximately 215 to 230 million years ago. That's around when the story of our modern turtles begins. But this is a story that has kind of confused researchers over the past because there wasn't always a completely clear picture of exactly where turtles came from, who they were most closely related to. Currently, the evidence suggests that turtles are more closely related to birds and crocodilians than to lizards and snakes as far as reptiles go. And years ago, actually, I think a young 8-year-old boy in South Africa found fossilized evidence of the animal pictured here, which is called Unatosaurus, which is now accepted as the oldest known ancestor of modern turtles. Around 260 million years ago, this animal appeared. And if you take a look at this picture, you can see the flattened, widened ribs. This animal was believed to be a terrestrial and burrowing species. So that flattened and widened rib structure through the midsection would have aided in burrowing beneath the ground. And from there, turtles sort of evolved and evolved and evolved until we have what we have currently today. So who are our modern turtles? They are reptiles. That's the classification that they belong under, and they're vertebrate animals. That means that they have a backbone. So sometimes people will think that because they have a shell, they're an invertebrate, but as you'll see in a few moments, they actually do have a spine, they have vertebrae just like us. They are ectothermic, which you might think of as cold-blooded. Cold-blooded can be a little bit misleading at times because it suggests that a cold-blooded animal always needs the most heat possible. But really what ectothermic means is that that animal is relying on external ambient sources of heat to regulate their body temperature and to jumpstart their metabolic function. So that means they'll need to bask in the sun, but they'll also need to move out of hot areas so that they don't overheat. Turtles are egg laying, as are most reptiles, not all. And they have scales or scutes in turtles' cases, and they breathe air using lungs. So even our aquatic species, including sea turtles, they can't breathe underwater. They need to come up and surface to breathe air. Turtles belong to the order Testudines, coming from the Latin root word testa, meaning shell or tile, and there are around 300 or a little bit more than 300 species worldwide, including the terrapins, turtles, and tortoises. We'll talk a little bit more about how those are different from each other. What turtles have in common with each other under this classification is the possession of a bony carapace and plastron, which are the scientific terms for their shell. They also don't have teeth and instead have a powerful beak. Their hip and shoulder girdles are inside of their rib cage, which is quite unique, and you'll get to see exactly why that is in a few moments. And they don't have external ear holes. Instead, they hear low frequency sounds and vibrations. So even though they don't have external ear holes, they can still hear. And aquatic species are going to be better adapted to hearing underwater. And these are just a few pictures of some of the representative species under the order Testudines. So a little bit more about a turtle's shell. If you take a look at the picture on the top, you can see sort of a breakdown or little cross-section of what it looks like inside a turtle's body. The top part of the shell is called the carapace. The bottom part is called the plastron. And then on the sides, which you can't really see here in that picture, the part of their shell that connects the two is called the bridge. So turtles' shells are actually constructed from wide modified ribs that grow from their vertebrae, which means that turtles are completely attached to their shells. Just like we are totally attached to our vertebrae, you can't take a turtle's body out of its shell and have it survive still. It grows with the animal as well. And you can also see in this picture on top why the hip and shoulder girdles are located inside of the rib cage, because the rib cage is sort of expanded to create their entire shell. And I actually have a representative example here from a turtle that was unfortunately killed in a road strike. But you can really see what we're talking about here with those widened modified rib bones. So just like us, if you were to trail your finger down our vertebrae or our spine or our back, turtles can feel this. They also absorb vitamin D through their shells as well. So we never want to alter or cause harm to a turtle shell because they can feel it and it can impact their ability to get essential things that they need, like vitamin D. If I flip this over, you can really see those vertebrae here and those widened ribs. So in most species, a turtle shell is going to be covered in keratinous scutes. So keratin is the same thing that our fingernails and hair are made out of, excluding our softshell turtles and leatherbacks, which are covered in a sort of leathery, tough, thick skin instead of those keratinous scutes. And in freshwater and aquatic species, those scutes are going to grow and shed throughout their lifetime. Tortoises are going to grow their scutes as well, but they're going to add layers of keratin instead of shedding them off. A little bit more about what a turtle shell can tell us. Age is one thing, though it's not a very totally reliable method. So if you think about having a cross-section cut out of a tree, and you can count those growth rings to kind of estimate the age of the tree, you can do something similar with a turtle's shell because of the way the scutes are either shed or the keratin layers are added on in the case of tortoises. It sort of leaves behind lines. So you can see in the bottom two pictures what that really looks like. You can kind of count those similarly to how you would count the rings, the growth rings of a tree. to estimate the age, but as turtles get older, their shell weathers, it gets smoother, the color is duller. It's a lot harder to really see all those rings. So it's not a completely accurate method of aging a turtle or a tortoise. When turtles and tortoises are first born, their shell is soft and it hardens as they get older. The color will change as well. So oftentimes you'll see turtles are born with this really bright colors, really bright, distinct patterns, and that will change and kind of dull out as they get older as well. And as far as carapace length and age are not always equivalent because some turtles or tortoises might reach a longer carapace length, so the top of their shell length might get longer quicker, depending on their access to nutrition, their environmental factors, the health of the individual. So you can't always say that just because a turtle is 10 inches long, it's this age. In some species, when the plastron, which is the bottom portion of a turtle's shell, is concave, meaning it has this sort of indentation there, that will indicate that the individual is a male. So this isn't true for every species of turtle and tortoise, but in some it is. And you can see in the picture on top, those are two box turtles. The male has a concave plastron because it allows them to mount the female. The species, our turtle and tortoises, shells, patterns, and coloration can help us with identification of species and also indicates things about the health of the animal. A lot of pet owners of turtles and tortoises might be familiar with this, but lots of different things can go wrong with turtles' shells when they do not have what they need, when their conditions in their environment are not correct, if they don't get enough vitamin D and calcium. So damage and shell rot, all of that stuff can kind of give us a clue about past injuries, nutritional deficiencies, and whether or not a turtle is really healthy. As far as their lifespan and reproduction, turtles and tortoises are known for their ability to live very, very long. Some individuals can live over 100 years, but the average lifespan is going to be around 15 to 50 years, depending on the species. Most turtles and tortoises are going to die from predation, vehicle collisions, or disease rather than old age. As far as reproduction, reaching sexual maturity can take really long in some species. It can take over 10 years for some species. And that's really important to know because if you have a threatened species of animal and they take 10 plus years to reach sexual maturity, that means that any pressures on them are going to really be impactful because if they can't survive for 10 or more years to reach sexual maturity, then they can't reproduce. And those population numbers are going to fall a lot faster if they're facing a lot of other pressures and high mortality or habitat loss, things like that. So for many freshwater species of turtles, the females are going to be larger than males, but in tortoises, the males will generally be larger. In both species, tails are often going to be larger in males as well, and the cloaca is going to be placed closer in towards the body. So the cloaca is sort of where their excrement comes out, and that's going to be closer in towards the body along the tail on a female. For pretty much all of our species, eggs are going to be laid on land in a nesting hole dug by a female. And turtles exhibit temperature-dependent sex determination, or TSD, which means that the temperature of the nest is going to determine the sex of the individual in the egg. So generally warm temperatures often will result in females, but this can change depending on the species and also different types of reptiles that can change as well. All right, so turtle, tortoise, or terrapin. All turtles are it's a tongue twister. All tortoises are turtles, but not all turtles are tortoises. So what that really means is that because all turtles and tortoises and terrapins fall under the order of the turtles, the testudines, they're all turtles. But we have different specializations, different classifications based on the characteristics of different individuals and the habitats that they inhabit, which is where we get our differences between individuals under the order testudines. So names can kind of change depending on where you are in the world, but generally here, a turtle is an aquatic or semi-aquatic species and also includes box turtles, which are not tortoises, but spend most of their time on land. Tortoises are going to be our terrestrial species that don't live in the water and don't really frequent aquatic environments. And then terrapins have a really unique experience, and they inhabit brackish estuarine environments, so where saltwater and freshwater meets, such as our salt marshes and mangrove ecosystems. So these are some pictures of individuals from each of those categories that I just discussed. In the top left, we have our characteristic turtle with those webbed feet. You can take a look at the different pictures and see what you notice that's different about each of them. So as I mentioned, in the top left, we have those webbed feet that are going to be an adaptation that allows turtles to swim. They've got a more streamlined shell and a little bit smoother skin. So their body is more aerodynamic. They're more adapted to being able to swim in their aquatic environment and to spend lots of time underwater. If you take a look at the nose as well, turtles' noses are a little bit more pointy. They're able to lift their nose to the surface of the water and take a breath a little bit easier than the individual to the right. What do you notice about the difference in this individual's face versus our turtle? It's kind of flat, right? It's very blunt and short. It doesn't really sort of point out. Their nose doesn't really point out. This is a tortoise. They've got more higher domed shells, really powerful elephant-like legs and feet and arms so that they can support their body weight as they're walking across land. And they've got dry, papery skin. And also their color is generally a little bit more dull than our turtles are going to be as well. It's a little bit more earth toned. Then on the bottom left, we have a box turtle. So box turtles, as I mentioned before, they're not tortoises, although they're going to spend the majority of their time on land. They don't have completely webbed feet, but they have a little bit of webbing. They also don't have those big, strong, thick elephant-like feet either. So they're kind of like a little bit of a middle ground in the way I think about it, but they are a turtle as opposed to a tortoise. And then on the bottom right, we have our terrapin. So you can see that really characteristic look, that speckled skin. Their diamond in this individual in particular is a diamondback terrapin, but you can see that diamond sort of shape in their scutes on their shell, as well as those characteristic lips that they have. So in Florida, we have around 30 native species of turtles, and we have seven different families that are represented here. So that includes our tortoises, our softshell turtles, pond turtles, musk and mud turtles, snapping turtles, leatherback sea turtles, and then general sea turtles. We're not going to discuss our terrapins or our sea turtles in this presentation. We're going to focus on freshwater and terrestrial animals in this presentation, but you can always visit our Sea Grant Agent resources to learn more about sea turtles and terrapins. All right, so our first tortoise is the gopher tortoise, and this is our first and only tortoise. We only have one native species of tortoise here in the state of Florida, and it is the gopher tortoise. They are state designated as threatened here in Florida. And if you take a look at this picture, try to notice some of those characteristics of tortoises that we just discussed, right? So those powerful feet and legs, those claws that are in this case suited for digging because gopher tortoises do burrow, that sort of drier skin, the blunt face, and the earth tone sort of dried, dull looking shell. Gopher tortoises are going to inhabit scrub and coastal uplands, so our drier areas. They like high and dry locations, which is partly why they are threatened, because those locations, those habitats, are often developed much faster because they're higher in elevation and they're drier. And if you are familiar with Florida, you know that higher elevation locations are sort of prime real estate because we have a lot of area that is inundated either seasonally or it gets really wet. So gopher tortoises need those higher, drier locations. And they can be found in all 67 counties in Florida. They need environments with loose sandy soils and low growing native vegetation and areas where the sunlight can penetrate through down to the surface, to the soil, so that it can allow low-growing plants to grow so that they can eat those plants, and also so that their burrows and the soil can be warmed as well. So fire is really important for this species because it helps to keep the habitats that they live in and depend on open and free from lots of tree canopy. And it also helps regenerate the native vegetation that they like to eat. So they are herbivorous, meaning they only eat plants. They're going to prefer a variety of our native shrubs and grasses, legumes, cactus, and fruits. They can even eat those prickly pear cacti that we have with those big spikes. They just kind of brush those spikes away and keep it moving. They are diurnal, which means they're more active during the day, and they're fairly solitary other than when they are searching for mates or competing for mates. So this is one of those species that we're going to talk about their reproduction a little bit because they are threatened. And as I mentioned, they take a long time to reach sexual maturity, 9 to 12 years for males or 10 to 21 years for females. That's a long time to have to survive as a threatened species with limited habitat, with predators, with invasive species that might be taking over your burrows, like our black spiny-tailed iguanas here, with road strikes. So they have to survive all of that before they can reproduce. So they're going to breed and reproduce from March through October. And they'll lay around 5 to 9 eggs per nest one time a year. That's another really important factor because that's not very many eggs, especially because turtle eggs and juvenile turtles are a favorite food for many wildlife species. So that's not a lot of eggs to be reproducing, especially when it takes you 10 to 20 years before you can actually reproduce. So gopher tortoises are what we call a keystone species. As I mentioned before, they do create burrows. Take a look at those really nice claws that they have for digging and those shovel-shaped legs that they have. And that's also why they need habitat with sandy, loose soil. So they're going to make these burrows that are around 6 feet deep into the ground and 15 feet long. Some can even be longer than that. And those burrows are utilized by over 350 different, what we call commensal species that live in there or find food or nest or utilize a gopher tortoise's burrow. So they're really, really important for our ecosystems and the sort of connected web of life here in all 67 counties because they can be found all throughout Florida. They'll live around 40 to 60 years in the wild and may be older in captivity. And 9 to 15 inches approximately is going to be the carapace length when they're around fully grown. So a little bit over a foot in larger individuals. Because they're protected, it is illegal to harass gopher tortoises. It is illegal to relocate them, to disturb their burrows. You're supposed to keep your distance away from their burrows. And actually, they lay their eggs in the sandy mound around the burrow. So in the bottom right, you can see a picture of a gopher tortoise burrow. That sandy mound there, some individuals will actually lay eggs in that area. So when you get too close to a gopher tortoise's burrow, you run the risk of stepping on their eggs, which we just mentioned. They're going through a lot to be able to make it to reproductive age, and then they're not laying very many eggs. So we really want to do as best as we can to protect this amazing animal. When you protect one gopher tortoise, 350 other species are going to benefit from that protection. So you, again, always want to keep your pets away as well. Oftentimes, gopher tortoises will be the victim of dogs who are permitted to get too close to them or their burrows, and they will often chew the legs of gopher tortoises. I know it's unpleasant to hear, but it is a problem. So you really want to ensure that you keep your pets on a leash anytime you're around gopher tortoises or their burrows. And if you are trying to build in an area where the burrows are present, you do need permits, and that is something that you have to go through with state regulations and county regulations as well. So in these pictures, you can see a juvenile gopher tortoise in the bottom left-hand corner. As I mentioned earlier, oftentimes turtles and tortoises will be differently colored as juveniles. So this one is really bright orangish yellow colored, and they'll eventually kind of change in coloration. Their shell will harden and get duller and more dome shaped until they get to be like this adult individual in the top right-hand corner. On the left, we have an image of gopher tortoise scat. So this is very easy to mistake for just a clump of mud or grass, especially when it's dried, but that's because they're herbivores. And for reference, that scat is around the size of the palm of my hand. So keep a lookout on the sides of trails where you see gopher tortoise burrows. If you're ever in our county preserves, you can see a lot of our gopher tortoise burrows, and there'll often be scat on the sides of the trails. All right. So now that we've talked a little bit about our fantastic gopher tortoises, let's get into our next family, the softshell turtles. In Sarasota County, the Florida softshell turtle is going to be the species that we are going to see. They're quite common. They live in a variety of freshwater and sometimes even brackish water environments. And that includes our local neighborhood stormwater ponds and lakes. It includes our slow moving sloughs and other bodies of water, really where there's slow moving water in a sandy or kind of muddy, mucky bottom. You can see the individuals here in the bottom right. That one has sand kind of caked on its body a little bit, and the one on the left is sort of camouflaged a little bit in the substrate at the bottom. So they're going to be really well adapted due to their coloration and the shape of their body to sort of snuggle into the bottom of the substrate and to hide. So our Florida softshell turtle and other softshell turtles in Florida, they are ones who have that leathery skin instead of those keratinous scutes. So if you look at these two individuals, you can kind of see they don't have those little scales on their back. They have this sort of uniform leathery skin in a much flatter pancake-like shape. They are very aerodynamic. They're good for swimming, and that flatter shape, again, is going to help them to hide and burrow in the substrate at the bottom of the water that they're inhabiting. They are carnivorous, so they're going to eat mostly snails, fish, and other crustaceans, and they can be aggressive when they feel threatened, and they may do something called musking. Musking is something that many species of reptiles, including some turtles, will do, and it's releasing this foul-smelling odor that kind of deters predators. So it is very foul smelling. You don't want to be musked on. And as well, I mentioned that turtles don't have teeth, but they have powerful beaks, okay? So take a look at the neck of this softshell turtle. It's very long. They can reach over half of their body length. So if you're ever helping a softshell turtle across the road, you want to be really careful with how you're holding them. There's an appropriate way to hold a turtle, and it's like this so that you're supporting under their plastron and your thumbs are kind of wrapping around to hold on top of their carapace. You're never dangling them by their legs or by their tail. But if you're holding a softshell turtle or really any turtle, you want to hold as close back towards the legs as possible so that your hands are out of reach of their beak, okay? Because it's powerful, they can really bite. Softshell turtles also have this really characteristic pig-like nose that some people also liken to a snorkel, because they will come up and stick their nose up to the surface of the water to take a breath. Because they have this much softer body and this more flattened shape, they want to keep away from the surface of the water as much as possible so that they're not as vulnerable to predation. So that nose helps them to come up and take a breath a little bit better. These individuals can get quite large. I've seen some really big softshell turtles, and I think the largest female was over 2 feet long. All right, so let's get into our cooters, because this is a very well-recognized grouping of turtles here in Florida and Sarasota County. They are under the Pseudomys species. And some people suspect that the word cooter actually comes from the word kuta, which means turtle, and was brought over by West African people who were enslaved in the South. I'm not 100% sure of the validity of that, but that is a very widely shared piece of information. So river cooters, the thing with cooters is that it's kind of hard to differentiate between the different species and subspecies. And this is even a point of contention within the scientific community of which individuals are actually a true subspecies or not. But we'll classify them here to kind of make sense of things into two different groups. So we have our river cooters, which are going to inhabit river systems with more current. There's going to be plenty of basking logs in those habitats, and they're going to have more of a gravel or sand bottom, as opposed to our pond cooters, which are going to inhabit slower moving bodies of water with a muddier bottoms, and they're going to be more likely to travel across land because they're going to be inhabiting smaller bodies of water, and they may need to shift to other habitats from time to time. So that's why you'll see them traveling more. So there's many subspecies here in Florida, depending on where they're found and their physical differences. And as I said, it's a point of contention a little bit. And some species may also hybridize in areas where they overlap as well. Again, as I mentioned before, males in these species are going to have longer tails, and their cloacal placement is going to be further away from their body than females. And males actually are also going to have elongated front nails, which they'll stroke females' faces with those nails as sort of a part of breeding and mating rituals. So I included these maps from Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC, because they kind of give you a really good picture of where the different species and subspecies are kind of divided. So in Sarasota County, we fall within the yellow here. Those are our pond cooters as opposed to river cooters. And specifically for us, we're going to have Pseudemes floridana peninsularis. Okay, so our Florida peninsula cooter. All right, so here are some images of our cooter species. They, again, are inhabiting slow-moving freshwater systems with abundant vegetation and shallow areas. They are herbivorous when they're adults primarily, so they're going to eat rooted aquatic vegetation. So you may see them snacking on some spatterdock with the beautiful yellow flowers that float above the water. When they're juveniles, they're going to eat a little bit more fish and invertebrates, so they won't be completely herbivorous when they're young. They are diurnal, so they'll come out and be more active during the day. And females will actually dig a really interesting three-hole nest. And it's thought that potentially that three-hole nest, it has different chambers to sort of protect where the eggs are actually located. So if a predator happens to find the nest, they might dig in one of those chambers and find no eggs, and hopefully those eggs will be spared. And our adults in this species are going to reach around 9 to 13 inches. And I've seen a maximum length of around 15, a little bit over 15 inches at times. So they can get fairly large, but are going to mostly be around a foot long, a little bit over a foot long when they're largest adults. They have a mostly yellow plastron, and their shell is a little bit domed, but it's going to be more streamlined and have sort of a darker base color with those yellow lines, as you can see going down their shell. And something to note as well that makes it kind of difficult to tell the difference between different cooter species is if you take a look at the individual down in the bottom right, its shell is covered in algae and it's really weathered. You can't really see very many defining characteristics. And that's going to be the case a lot of times when you see turtles. They're kind of skittish as well, so you won't always get such a good look at them before they get right back into the water or they go deeper into the water. So it can be really challenging to 100% correctly identify what species you're seeing if it kind of looks similarly to other species. Our next cooter is the Florida red-bellied turtle. And the red-bellied turtle is a little bit more distinct in its look. It is going to inhabit, similarly to our other cooter species that we just mentioned, permanent, slow-moving freshwater systems. They'll also be found in spring runs and sometimes brackish water as well, areas where there's adequate basking areas and water lilies. The presence of lots of water lilies have been found to be associated with presence of the Florida red-bellied turtle. They are herbivorous. They'll eat rooted aquatic vegetation similarly to the peninsula cooter. And when they're juveniles, they'll eat fish and invertebrates as well. They're also more active during the daytime. What's interesting about the Florida red-bellied turtle is there's some evidence that suggests their highly domed shape might provide additional protection from alligators. So they have been found to actually utilize alligator holes and trails and nest alongside alligator nests. So that higher domed shape might afford them additional protection from predation from alligators, because alligators will eat turtles at times. So if you take a look at these pictures here, you can see that more domed shape, the deeper orangish red kind of vertical stripes. Their belly is not always going to be so distinctly orangish red colored. It might at times be a little bit more yellow colored, and that can be confusing as well and make it a little bit harder to distinguish them from the Peninsula cooter. But generally, I will look for that orangish yellow or orangish red sort of vertical lines on their carapace, and the really dark color of their shell as well. All right, so we're not going to go into these sliders so much, but I wanted to mention them because there are a ton of red-eared sliders in Sarasota County. So the yellow-bellied slider is a native species to Florida, mostly found in northern Florida and a little bit into the northern peninsula. So not as much here in Sarasota County. They are diurnal as well. Most species are going to be diurnal, except for some that we'll mention. And our yellow-bellied sliders, they're omnivorous, but what's really important is the red-eared sliders. They're both very similar species. If you see, they have some overlap, both omnivorous. They can interbreed with each other. Red-eared sliders are non-native. They're found in several counties in Florida, and they're often introduced through individuals who release turtles that they no longer want, who they've had as pets. So this is really, really important to think about. If you want a pet turtle, you have to be mindful that it's going to take a lot of specialized care. It's going to take time, lots of money and resources to provide them with adequate food, nutrition, adequate space, an aquatic environment that also has places for them to bask. It's not super easy caring for turtles, especially when they live for a long time and can get fairly large. So oftentimes that will result in pet owners putting their turtles out into nature when they don't want them anymore. And then we get species that compete with our native species, interbreed with our native species, and impact the ecology of our area. So you never want to release pets out into nature when you no longer want them. It's best to find local organizations or responsible and qualified individuals to take over pets if you don't want them anymore, as opposed to releasing them out in nature. The red-eared slider, as it's named, has that stripe of red along the side of its head. The yellow-bellied slider does not have that. So that is kind of the easiest identifying feature. And again, like I said before, you'll see these all the time in our stormwater ponds, and you'll see many of them coming up to the surface to be fed, because many people often feed turtles, and we'll talk a little bit more about why you don't want to do that. And because of their non-native status and how they've sort of proliferated, they are no longer permitted to be sold here in the state of Florida. And possession of red-eared sliders after 2007 is prohibited as well. All right, so box turtles here in Sarasota County, you might not see them as often. They might be a little bit harder to find. They're going to spend a lot of time in leaf litter. They are mostly terrestrial, but they're going to utilize more damper force. So with mesic or wet soils, they're going to hide beneath leaf litter. They might sort of inhabit the surrounding areas of shallow wetlands. And they have a pretty small home range, about 1 square mile. So they're not going to be traveling very far across land. They're a really, really cool species of turtle. And in the bottom picture, you can see why they're called a box turtle. That's one that I'm holding there that has completely closed up its shell. So not all turtle species can do this. Box turtles have what's called a hinged plastron, so they can close their plastron up to meet their carapace, to fully enclose themselves in their shell for full protection. So you see how you can't see the head or the arms or legs. They're fully enclosed in there. So that's why we call them box turtles. They also have this really highly domed, boxy shaped shell. And they tend to have more of a beak to them. Some species will really even have kind of a hook to their beak as well. They are omnivorous throughout their entire lives, so they'll eat worms, fruits, mushrooms, vegetation, even carrion, snails, other insects. They are more active during the day, and they'll live around over 50 years in the wild. They are one of the species that does have that concave plastron, as you saw in the previous picture in males. And their eye color can be different in between the sexes. That can be also a way to potentially tell the difference between sexes of box turtles in some species as well. All right. So our mud turtles are very interesting. They're one of my favorite turtles to see. They're quite secretive and mostly nocturnal, but they can be active during the day as well. They're pretty small turtles, around 3 to 5 inches long, and we've got two species here, the striped mud turtle and the eastern mud turtle, which can be found statewide. The striped mud turtle is going to be a little bit more in the Peninsula area. And in the lower Keys, because of development and a decrease in low salinity habitat, there is a cause for concern in that population. They're going to inhabit slow-moving, brackish, and freshwater environments. Again, low salinity with soft, muddy bottoms, so ponds, ditches, areas with lots of vegetation. They'll also spend a lot of time on land and burrow beneath leaf litter as well. I see the striped mud turtle quite often. Not quite often, but I see it more than I see the eastern mud turtle here in Sarasota County. I've seen the striped mud turtle in our bioswale, which is really, really small area with just a little bit of water that collects. I've also seen one crossing the street at Myakka River State Park. And these individuals do have a partially hinged plastron as well. So similarly to the box turtles that we just mentioned, they can also partially close their plastron so that they can be more protected when a predator is coming, for example. They do have something called barbels. They're like these fleshy skin appendages that extend off of around their facial area and sort of chin that are an additional sensory appendage. The musk turtle, the common musk turtle, really in this photo, you can see those barbels a lot clearer, those fleshy extensions off of the bottom of their chin area that help them detect prey. So their habitat is going to be statewide, mostly excluding the Keys, but they're going to be looking for those really still, calm, freshwater environments. They're omnivorous and they do prefer to eat mollusks, so our snails. And they are also going to eat aquatic vegetation, pond lily seeds, worms, leeches, the larvae of other insects, as well as crustaceans. So a pretty varied diet. They can be active at different times of the day, depending on location, sometimes nocturnal as well. And this is another individual, as its name suggests, that release a strong musk as a defense mechanism. And I have seen some evidence as well that they are pretty deep divers as well in their aquatic environments. Okay, so the snapping turtles are very charismatic. Children love to talk about snapping turtles. Every time we see a turtle, they're like, oh my gosh, is it a snapping turtle? Um, in Sarasota County, we don't have the alligator snapping turtle. We have the Florida snapping turtle. So it's a smaller species, a little bit different than the alligator snapping turtle, but still large. So the Florida snapping turtle is going to inhabit peninsular Florida in our small, shallow, soft bottom freshwater habitats. They need lots of vegetation to hide, and they'll also inhabit wetlands. You might be wondering, why do snapping turtles need to hide if they're so fierce and powerful? You take a look at the pictures here, they don't have as wide and large of a shell as some of the other individuals, especially the plastron. They've got a lot of exposed skin. So that's one of the reasons why they're going to hide more and why they need that powerful bite as a defense mechanism. They don't have as much shell to really protect their body. They are omnivorous as well as being scavengers. So they'll eat a variety of things, invertebrates, amphibians, small reptiles, carrion, aquatic vegetation, you name it. They're going to bask from within the water as well, and they'll be mostly nocturnal. So instead of coming out to bask on a log or on the side, the grass on the side of a pond or lake, they're going to kind of bask from the shallow water so that they can get that sunlight through the water. And that's another way that they'll stay protected instead of exposing themselves on a log or the bank of a body of water. They will travel far overland during a breeding nesting season, and that's going to be around April through June, a little bit earlier as you get into warmer areas of South Florida. They have this long spiked tail that you can see sort of in the top picture as well, and they can get around 1.5 feet long. They're also prone to leech attachments, again, because they have more of that exposed skin. Okay, so now that we've talked about some of the representative species that can be seen here in Sarasota County, what can you do to help protect our turtles and tortoises? Because quite often we see a ton of turtles and tortoises that are victims of road strikes. They face a lot of predation pressure when they're young and their eggs as well. Habitat loss and degradation, we know that we face some water quality issues and aquatic vegetation loss. So all of that is going to impact our turtle and tortoise species, as well as invasive species that are introduced, like our black spiny-tailed iguanas that will compete and take over the burrows of gopher tortoises and sometimes even eat the eggs of other native species. Like the red-eared slider that's going to compete with our yellow-bellied slider, and that competes with other native species of turtles. Disease spread, which invasive species also impact and bring in diseases that our native species are not really accustomed to dealing with. Boat strikes, shooting. A lot of people will actually shoot turtles because they think that they're eating up all the fish out of their pond. As well as consumption for food. This doesn't happen as much anymore because a lot of turtles are protected now. But also the pet trade is a big thing. So people taking turtles out of the wild and selling them. It is not permitted in Florida to take turtles from the wild and to sell them. So keep that in mind. And you can always report things like that are happening, any violations that you see with our wildlife species to FWC. And here's a little bit of information there for a specific turtle hotline for FWC. So those are some of the issues that they face. What can we do to help protect them? So road strikes, you want to drive, as well as boat strikes, you want to drive slowly and be very aware and alert, especially when you're driving on a road in between aquatic habitats. So like we mentioned, some species are going to need to go to different aquatic habitats. They're going to travel over land, and that often puts them at risk of being a victim of a road strike. So you want to be alert and careful and drive slowly, as well as boating slowly for our sea turtles and our terrapins who can be victims of boat strikes. You don't want to take individuals from the wild or introduce any pets into the wild as well. That will help with the disease spread. If you see a turtle or a tortoise, don't take it home with you. Keep our turtles and tortoises wild. They have everything they need out in their environments, and it's a lot harder for us to provide an adequate environment for them than it is for them to stay in their native environments. You can help protect water quality issues, use less pesticides and fertilizers. If you have local stormwater ponds, you can look at making those ponds a lot healthier by including a lot of aquatic vegetation, our native aquatic vegetation, and utilizing no-mow zones. And I'll share some more information about how you can learn about healthier ponds and how you can make your ponds in your neighborhood more healthy. Not shooting turtles. A lot of turtles, often when they are adults that we talked about, they're going to be eating mostly aquatic vegetation. So sometimes people are mistaken in thinking that they're eating fish out of their ponds. And even if they are, turtles are really important for our ecosystems. They not only serve as food for lots of other animals, but they also impact the aquatic environments that they live in as well. And then, of course, not taking turtles from the wild for consumption or for utilizing their shells for art and decoration. Those things, again, don't happen as much nowadays. So now that we've discussed some of the species that can be found in Sarasota County, let's talk a little bit more about some of the issues, the conservation issues that turtles and tortoises face, as well as what you can do to help. So I have a list here of some of the main concerns: habitat loss and degradation, water quality issues, and aquatic vegetation loss are going to really impact our turtle and tortoise species. As I mentioned with the gopher tortoise, those high and dry locations, but that they need to survive, they can't burrow in areas that are going to get flooded because they spend around 80% of their time in those burrows. So they're going to be impacted by development that is destroying their habitat. Aquatic species are going to be impacted by water quality issues, so unhealthy ponds that don't have the appropriate native aquatic vegetation for them to not only eat, but utilize for hiding. Disease spread, which has to do with invasive species as well, and people releasing pets out into the wild. So often non-native animals will have different parasites and diseases that our native species are not accustomed to dealing with. Climate change can also impact the spread of disease in our wildlife as well. Road and boat strikes, those are big ones because I mentioned that some of our species are going to need to travel between different ponds and aquatic environments. So they're going to be a lot more at risk of being hit by cars when they're traveling and looking for other locations to live in, or if they're looking for mates during breeding season. Sea turtles and terrapins are more vulnerable to boat strikes. So you want to make sure that you're driving slowly and you're being very alert and aware, especially when you're driving through areas that have ponds on either side. You're going to see a lot more animals trying to cross there. So you want to be really cautious when you're driving. Invasive species. So not only invasive species of turtles and tortoises that compete with native species, but invasive species of other wildlife, like the black spiny-tailed iguana, which I mentioned briefly, is going to compete with gopher tortoises, take over their burrows, and will also eat the eggs of some of our native species. So you never want to release any pets out into the wild, not only to curb disease spread, but also so that we don't have more invasive species like our Burmese pythons, for example, which are causing huge impacts and effects in Everglades areas. Shooting. So people will shoot turtles because they think they're eating all their fish out of their ponds. As we saw, there's several individuals as adults who are herbivorous, who are eating mostly vegetation. So turtles have an important role in our ecosystems. They serve as food for many species throughout their lifespan, and they also impact the aquatic environments and terrestrial environments that they live in. Remember, gopher tortoises are supplying habitat for 350 different species of other wildlife, okay? So we don't want to be killing our turtles and tortoises. Consumption for food and shells being used for art and decoration are less of an issue now as they were previously, but still we don't want to be taking turtles from the wild for food, nor do we want to be killing them to use their shells. And then the pet trade. So it is not permitted to take wild turtles and sell them here in Florida, but you also want to think about taking turtles to keep for pets yourself. Do you need to do that? Is that what's best for the animal? Most likely it's not, because if they're not already injured and being taken care of by a wildlife rehabber, for example, they're going to be way better off in their native environment. It has everything they need. Turtles have really specific needs to survive. And so it's going to be a lot harder for us to provide those healthy needs. It's going to take a lot of resources and time and care to do that. So we want to leave our wild turtles in the wild. It's much better for them and for our ecosystems. And again, keeping pets and children away from our turtles, especially gopher tortoises and their burrows, is really important too. There's several gopher tortoises and other species of turtles that are brought into rehab facilities because dogs will get to them and will chew their limbs off or will end up killing them on accident. So when you see any violations with anything related to wildlife, really, if you see someone or know someone who's been taking turtles from the wild and selling them, if you see people who are harming or harassing gopher tortoise burrows, really any wildlife violations, you can report to FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. And here is the information for their wildlife alert hotline here. Here's some of the research that was utilized for this presentation. It is really challenging to really get a lot of information on turtles if you really think about how quickly they disappear when you see them, when you approach them. So I really want to take a moment to acknowledge all of the hard work that scientists over the years have done to study our turtle and tortoise species and to help protect them and provide us with the information that we need to make better choices to help protect our turtle and tortoise species. If you'd like to learn more about gopher tortoises, we have an entire Wild Sarasota webinar all about gopher tortoises, as well as our wildlife webpage and our invasive species webpage that share information on tons of different species. The Florida Master Naturalist Program is a really amazing adult education program that's developed by the University of Florida to increase awareness of our natural world here. And it is a wonderful program. If you're interested, please visit our website to learn more. We also have a natural area story map for Sarasota County for some of our parks and preserves, where you can kind of utilize an interactive map for different parks and preserves here in Sarasota County to learn about the natural history, the ecology, the wildlife that can be found there. And it's a really lovely resource, not only to use at home to learn more about some of our local ecology, but to take out on the trail with you to learn as you go. So thank you so much for joining me for Wild Sarasota Turtle Talk. I hope that you've learned some useful information about our local turtle and tortoise species, as well as some general information about the order Testudines. Our turtles and tortoises are really special and really beautiful animals. So let's work together to help protect them and to protect the environment and ecosystems that they depend on. Hope to see you for another Wild Sarasota presentation.